Well, here we are, another podcast. And normally I would say, hello, Renee, but we have someone filling in today for Renee. Molly. We're going to get to Molly here in a minute, but Molly, I'm going to complain to you just like I complained to Renee. It's the middle of summer. I've got this grain bin project going on. I'm thinking about fall, and it seems like a long time until fall, but I've got to get the combine ready. We've got preparation. I've got to learn how to operate this new grain drying system. And really, it takes a lot of strategy and planning to have everything done on time, to manage the electricians. And really, that's what we're going to be talking about today is how do we plan and how do we be strategic? It doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, if it's a personal business or a business that has thousands of employees, we've really got to think about how we plan and set ourselves up for success. So, Molly, could you please introduce yourself and welcome to the podcast?
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be on the face of the podcast. Normally, I'm behind the scenes here. So I'm Molly. I am an integrator and business manager that bridges the gap of strategic implementation, operational efficiency, and aligned action for purpose-driven entrepreneurs. I initially started my career with a bachelor's of healthcare administration and master's in business in an effort to improve processes within the healthcare system. But after having my two girls, I decided to leave the corporate world and enter into entrepreneurship to build something of my own so I could achieve more flexibility, financial freedom, and fulfillment. So I have paved my way as an expert in operations and systems, supporting small businesses. And now just this year, I have started supporting virtual assistants to confidently step into the integrator role to support visionaries while creating the life that they desire.
You are busy. Now, tell me, because I didn't realize how much I needed you in my life until you were inserted in my life, thanks to Renee. But tell me how you got to know Renee. How did you end up in this place that you're helping us? You do all the stuff behind the scenes for us, and it's absolutely fantastic. But how did you end up here?
Yeah, so I started with Renee back in January 2022. So I've been working with Renee for now 2.5 years. And then, so that makes, I think we launched Rural Policy Partners about a year ago. So yeah, crazy how time flies, but I got connected with Renee. And yeah, I have been working with you guys ever since.
It's been almost a year and a half. So time flies where you're having fun, Molly. Yeah, I think, as I think back to my experience as well, working in the nonprofit sector and thinking about the corporate world, it's how important it is to hold accountable, right? Because I think you said it yourself. How do you kind of keep those visionaries on track, right? Because I love having great ideas and I love jumping from good idea to good idea to good idea, but sometimes the follow through just isn't so good. So tell us, how do you approach an entrepreneur? How do especially I think about solopreneurs, right? They sometimes need the most support. And so tell me about how do you approach that and kind of what tools do you have that assist in that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I never knew that working with visionaries was where I was going to end up. But what I kind of noticed is I was connected with these people who were those inspirational leaders, or they had these big, bold dreams, or they wanted to create this massive impact. But the common denominator between all those people was, like you said, there wasn't the action steps behind those dreams and that impact. So what I have kind of learned over the years is how to work with these visionaries to create that action. And that really comes down to strategic planning and creating the right systems in the business and kind of breaking those two pieces down further. It comes down to tracking your metrics and creating new processes, and then just really figuring out how the visionary wants to work. So it's not only about creating a business that's successful, but also creating one that really works how the visionary wants their life to be. So creating that work-life harmony.
Yeah, I love it. And I love how we have this conversation on so many different levels, right? Because, in our business and rural policy partners, we need you as that integrator to help us stay grounded on what the next RFPs are. Are we applying for RFPs, so we're planning 6 months, 12 months, 18 months out. Are we doing the work today? So we do have work in 18 months. You hold us accountable every quarter, just like you should to do that. But on the flip side, a lot of times it's Brent or Renee and I who are then going and anchoring the visionaries of different larger structures, because as we think about systems, it takes a visionary, no matter if it's a state system, a regional system, a district system. There's visionaries all along the way. And so we're all doing that same work, right? Like I need my own integrator, but then I serve as the integrator sometimes somewhere else. How do we keep all of that in balance? Because it has to really harmonize, Molly. And so how do you help with that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to that strategic planning. And that really starts with, which is what we've said, is that mission, that vision, that impact or transformation that a business is wanting to make. And then from there, you kind of take that and you work your way backwards. So it's a lot of working your way backwards. And sometimes it's hard to think about the future or where you're going. But just having something in line makes sure that you're going to go where you want to go. Because if you don't have that in place, then you could end up somewhere that you weren't expecting, or you maybe created a business that isn't working for the way you want your life to go. So it really begins with, like I said, that mission, that vision. And then we do all the things to then break that down into the detailed action steps.
It amazes me sometimes. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but whenever we do strategic planning with an organization or a system that we go into, we always start as, what's your mission? What's your vision? What are your guiding principles? And I ask for those things. And I was recently working with someone, and they literally said to me, I'm not sure what our guiding principles are. And we had to go dig on the website to find their mission. And so one of the things that I think is really important, and I think you'll agree with me, is keeping those things in the forefront, right? We can't think about planning and creating goals and looking ahead unless we're anchoring in, what do we stand for? What are our values? Why are we here? And so oftentimes I see leaders drift, right? They forget why the organization or why the company they own exists. And then they start going after different things that have nothing to do. And then that starts to take all their time. How do you help people stay focused on their mission, their vision, those guiding principles, those core values, right? That we can call them a million different things these days. But how do we keep people on track, like anchored to what they're there to do, right? The values of their company.
Yeah, one of the things I like to say is, especially in operations, is there's so many things we can do. We can find tons of things to do, but most of the time, those aren't actually moving the needle. So
Right.
it's super important to remember where we're going so that we're creating the right action. So the kind of the first step is thinking about your 3 to 5 year goals. So in 3 to 5 years, what are your targets? What do you want to be hitting in those years to come? And then from there, you go to your annual planning. And I like to, for an annual plan, pick 3 big goals. Because one of the things that I have seen throughout the years is if you do more than 3 goals, likely we're not going to hit any of them. So narrowing it down to just 3 goals for the year, and then taking those goals and breaking them down into key performance indicators. And that is really where you start to see, how are we going to reach our goals? What action steps do we need to take? So for example, if your goal is to make 100K in revenue for the year, where are those streams of income coming from? And those KPIs are what determines how we're going to get to that metric. And then you just keep going further and further back with the KPIs. So say you want to launch a program. So how do you fill the people in that program? How do you create it? So it just kind of keeps working its way down. And instead of just creating a goal to create it, which I feel often we do, especially at the end of the year when we're creating these big goals, we set them and then kind of forget about them. So KPIs kind of interjects in that and creates the action that is needed to actually hit those goals. And the numbers should work. And then from there, we take those KPIs and we do our 90-day planning. So every quarter, we create a plan for the next 3 months. And the reason being for 90-day planning is our brains don't like to think past 90 days when it comes to taking action. And there's even some people that say it's best to even work in like 6 to 8 week sprints. So that is kind of the concept of 90-day planning is that's just how our brains can comprehend what we're going to do. So within the 90-day plan, we have our 3 months, and then each month breaks down into specific projects, and then each project breaks down into objectives, and each objective breaks down into those detailed action steps. And then once you have those step-by-step actions, you can add in how long it's going to take, when they should be due, and then from there you can delegate out to the team or whoever's going to be working on those initiatives. So that's really how you start with that big vision and you slowly work back into getting like detailed of from A to Z what we're going to be doing.
Molly, that sounds exhausting. I can tell you, I just want to go do stuff, right? I have a really good idea. Why do we have to go through all that? And tell me, why do we need to write it down, right? Why do we need to write it down? And why do we need to regularly look at it? Because, I think I know what my goals are. I don't think I need to write that down, do I?
Yeah, so often, especially this is a common thing with visionaries, it's really hard to understand all the little things that need to happen. So my brain immediately goes to, okay, we need to do A, B, C, D, where visionaries are really focused on the long term, the big picture, and not all the little details. So it's super important to really write that down, and especially doing 90-day planning with somebody else. So even for myself, even though I do 90-day planning all the time, with visionaries, doing it for myself is really hard. You need that kind of outside person to walk you through that process and pull out all of that information. And yeah, having it just down on paper keeps us on track. So we check in on a weekly, monthly basis to make sure we are doing what we need to do.
The other day, somebody asked me, they're like, how hard is it to have a podcast? Isn't there a lot of details to that? And Molly, I have to confess to you, what I said was, well, I don't know. I just show up and record it. And then it just ends up like on social media and it's posted all these different places. And now it's on YouTube. It's just magic. Like, I don't know how it gets done, but I know that that's not my strength. Right. And so it's having the right people on the bus. So tell me how important it is for leaders um to be able to have that self-awareness, to be like, you know what, I really like to have a podcast, but I don't have the time or the energy or the understanding or the stamina, right? We're going to be coming up on a year of doing this podcast. And remember, I started out being like, I'm never going to do a podcast. I don't really like podcasts. I'm not going to do that. But having the right people on the team, right, made it so it worked. And so tell me about how important it is that everyone has that self-awareness to understand what their role is. And how do you help people to stay in their lane, if you will, if they start to drift outside of their role?
Yeah, no, this is super important because you want to make sure you have, like you said, the right people in the right seats. And it really comes down to just getting in tune with what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what's your zone of genius, and then what truly lights you up. Where do you thrive? Where's your passion at? And once you kind of identify that and figure out like what does an ideal day look like for you, then you can start to kind of put people in where it makes sense. So for me, I'm not the visionary brain, so I'm much better behind the scenes where you and Renee, you're more visionary people. So you thrive in more that big picture, that impact driven. And it all works together. And that's the key piece about being an integrator is I really integrate all the different areas in a business so that things run smoothly and there's flow and alignment in the business.
Absolutely. So just for a minute, if people want to learn more, because I know there's some really great books, and just talking with you, we didn't talk about this at all, right? But I'm hearing Jim Collins, Gino Wickman, right? I think about all of those business legends that they use all the keywords you're using, right, Molly?
Mhm.
There's some great books out there, and maybe that's some stuff we could link to this. And so I'm not a big book reader, but I can tell you, I've read Traction. A lot of what you're talking about is in Traction. Gino Wickman's kind of I guess, the OG, right? When we say, he's the
Mhm.
person we go to with this. What other books would you recommend or resources do you guide people to as you think about this? If they want to learn more, think about, wait, maybe I should be thinking outside of what we do. We should be thinking about someone like a Molly to help support us or we should be thinking about someone like, Jason or Renee to come in and help us get strategy and then figure out how do we sustain it by keeping someone like Molly around to be able to do that. Tell me more about how people learn about that.
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head with Gino Wickman. So that's like my number one book I'd recommend because he talks all about the concept of an integrator and a visionary and how that all works. But some other resources, the book Clockwork, that is a really good one. It's all about creating your business so that if you were to leave for 4 weeks out of the year, it would still be working. And it creates kind of similar to how I talk about the strategic planning process is what's your main objective and how do you kind of break that down and track it. And then my other favorite book I like to recommend is The E-Myth Revisited. And that one's really good because it really makes you look at your business in the most, how can you develop it in the most efficient and effective way? So those, in addition to the Gino Wickman series, really good.
Yeah, that's Michael Gerber. So, I think those are great resources that you can find to do that. And so, Molly, tell me about, I've got an egg background, right? We talk about farming on this all the time. And so, some businesses, it's much harder to plan for that than other businesses. And so, how do you approach that when you have really unique situations? I always throw in, well, farmers don't get to take 4 weeks off, right? It gets much more complicated, when it comes to, this spring, it was tough getting the crops in. It rained every morning for like 2 weeks straight. And so, it's hard to balance all of those things. And so tell me, how do you approach that? Because I would imagine some people come to you and go, but that doesn't work for me. How do you help people who are really in some of those situations that they need to have a backup plan? They need to have a strategic plan if something goes wrong, but they don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really good question. So one of the things that I love to do, so the framework that I've put together, the great thing about it is it's customizable. So your concepts are the same, but you're able to customize based on the type of business or what the visionary, how they want to work. But it lays out that groundwork, that foundation for doing that planning. But what happens inside the 90-day plan is going to look different for every business. So really, like everyone's going to have that vision, their goals, and then breaking that down. Yes, it may look different for every business, but having some sort of focus for the quarter or each month can really help move things forward. And like you said, having a backup plan is super important because there are businesses that are going to need that if something doesn't work. So yeah, I mean, the framework is set up in a way so that you can take it and morph it to how your business works and the needs that you have.
Absolutely. I'm going to switch gears 1 minute because now I'm thinking of questions. I just had coffee with someone who operates like this in their business. And the person I was having coffee with was kind of concerned because leadership was sometimes taking on 2 or 3 different roles, the same person taking on the same roles because they're having workforce issues. How do you approach that when maybe someone's not really paying attention and they're just trying to work a system like yours, right? They're trying to do all the things, but they're not executing well. Tell me the importance of how important it is to execute well, because otherwise, can it be detrimental to a business if you're not executing well?
Yes. So I see this happen where you do all the planning, but then the execution's not there. So you're planning, but then you're not meeting your goals. So execution is super important, but one thing to do, because things happen, like you can't predict everything. It's not going to be perfect. So that's kind of where that focus comes into play of having that one thing that you want to accomplish in the quarter. So you might have 3 or 4 things that you have planned, but you really want to pick, okay, if nothing else comes to fruition, what's the one thing that needs to happen? So having that core focus is super important. And that's the one that you want to make sure you really execute on so that things are still moving, even if you have to cut back on certain things. Because a lot of times, like when we create a 90-day plan, usually the third month is pretty light. And that I do it that way because we probably have to shift things over. We can't get everything done in the first month or so because things come up, you never know. That's kind of my tip of making sure that you can execute is making sure there's a primary core focus that no matter what, this is going to happen, so that the needle keeps moving.
So one key element of execution is making sure all the teams on board, right? And so talk to me for a minute, kind of as we get to the end here, about how important it is to cascade the message through. Whether or not you have a team of one or a team of 20, right? And and we do a lot of work when organizations are in crisis, right? Or when there's a huge change and we have to help people to manage through that change. And that's when people are anxious, right? People aren't thinking straight sometimes. They're anxious. Am I going to have a job? How important is it to share the plan, making sure everyone understands it? Some folks call that cascading messages, right? How does it cascade through the entire organization? Because you can have a great plan, but if nobody shares it, what purpose does that serve, Molly?
Yeah, this is really good because when I was especially in big organizations, like when I was back in the corporate world, I probably couldn't tell you what the mission and vision was. So it's a lot harder to do in big organizations, especially in those. You really want to be good about communicating what you're doing, what the plan is, because then everybody feels that drive to want to make it happen. You want to get people excited. You want to show people that we are making a difference and this is the transformation we're going to provide. And one of the things, especially with small business, is you want people on your team whose their own personal mission aligns with the bigger mission. So that's what I make sure whatever client I work with, I make sure that my mission falls within theirs because as I'm working towards their mission, it's ultimately working towards mine as well. So it's super important to get people on the same page, making sure that they are aligned because if there is that unalignment, then they're not going to care if things get executed or if we're actually working towards the goals of the business.
Absolutely. I tell everyone over communicate, over communicate, over communicate.
Mhm.
One email isn't enough, right? I came out of a strategic planning session just a couple of months ago, and I asked the team sitting around the table, I'm like, how often do you want your executive team to communicate with you? And the team looked around and they're like, weekly. And I go, what if there's nothing to share? What if there's nothing going on? They're like, we want them to share that there's nothing new to report. We just need to hear that right now. We need regular communication. And it was just one email. All the team asked for was one email a week. They're like, it's fine. If it says nothing, if it says there's nothing to report this week, they're like, that'd be great. We just want to know that. And so I looked to leadership. I said, can you all send an email once a week? Because that's what your team's asking for right now, right? It's going to help you through this crisis. And so I thought that was great, right? I'm like, the lesson learned is over communicate because it helps people. It helps your workforce. It's going to retain people. It also helps them with that communication, right? You can insert different things like, here's our guiding principles this week. I have nothing new to report, but let's reflect on our guiding principles. Let's reflect on our mission, why we're here. It's amazing to me how we forget some of those things sometimes when we're just trying to get stuff done, right? When we're in the day to day digging in. So, Molly, how do we get a hold of you? I know you're going to put this in the show notes, but tell us how we get a hold of you. If somebody's really interested in learning more, how can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is mollymariss.com. Otherwise, I am on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and my handle is Molly Mariss on all three of those.
Awesome. And one thing, I'm going to do the recovering politician self-care policy of the week. No, I'm not a politician, and I'm not sure I should be talking about self-care, but I think it's really important as we think about Molly and I hosting today, right? Renee got called away to take care of a family issue. And even a small company like ours, we continue forward, right? And so having a team that can jump in and say, hey, we've got this, you go take care of your personal stuff. And we really need to think about in all of our companies, organizations, how do we set our employees up for success? How do we allow them to have time off when they need to have time off? because it's important, right? We should be able to leave guilt-free if we have to take care of a family member or take care of a personal emergency. And I think that that's a really important culture, right? We talk about emotional well-being when we go out and speak. We talk about how to create emotionally safe workplaces, but this is what it looks like in real life, right? Sometimes we pinch hit, we step in and help each other out, and that's great, right, Molly? I mean, I think it was great that you were able to come today and really we really just did this off the cuff, and I thought it was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, and actually, one of the ways that we measure success is if we can take a vacation, because that's not only important for self-care, but if we can create a business that we're able to go on vacation or have time off for a family situation, then we're doing something right. So that's a key performance indicator that we use.
That's awesome. Well, in this episode, Renee always does the outline of what we just talked about. And so I'm just going to take a stab at it. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff. We talked about how do we organize ourselves as an organization? How do we support our team? How do we set goals? How do we break that down into 90-day manageable tasks? And how do we use an outside integrator to come in and support us to be able to do that in a way that makes sense, no matter if we're a huge organization or a small organization? We all need help sometimes. And so opening ourselves up to understand where our weak points are and learning more about that as we go is absolutely fantastic. And so I hope you'll join us next time, because we're going to continue this series on strategic planning. And we might be able to bring another partner in from Rural Policy Partners, Brent, and we're going to talk about some strategic thinking. So it's a term that Brent and I created traveling, doing strategic planning. And so it's really how we get those entrepreneurial ideas going. So we hope you'll join us next time.